I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thank you for listening to Your Working Life. This is my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. Now, I know that you spend a significant portion of your life at work, so I'm on a mission to provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And I'm delighted to welcome my very special guest to the show today. Pamela Slim is with me. Pamela, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, I'm really excited to dive into a juicy conversation about your work and your book, Body of Work, but I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you first. Pamela Slim is an award-winning author, speaker, and leader in the new world of work. She spent the first 10 years of her solo practice as a consultant to large corporations such as Hewlett-Packard, Charles Schwab, and Cisco Systems, where she worked with thousands of employees, managers, and executives. In 2005, she started the Escape from Cubicle Nation blog, which is now one of the top career and business sites on the web. She's coached thousands of budding entrepreneurs in businesses ranging from martial arts studios to software startups. And her new book, Body of Work, was released with Penguin Portfolio. Pamela, welcome to the show.
I am so happy to be here. I can't wait to have a great conversation.
Me too. We are kindred spirits in many ways in that we want to empower people in their careers. So thank you for your time today. So let's talk a little bit about where the idea for the book, Body of Work, came from. Tell me how that all came to pass.
Yeah, well, I have worked for myself for almost 20 years. And so I've worked in just about every work mode that you can imagine. I've been an employee, I've worked at a nonprofit, I've been a volunteer executive director, I've been an entrepreneur for many years. And in doing startup coaching for about 10 years that I did at Escape from Cubicle Nation, which was working with people in corporate jobs who wanted to leave and start a business, I began to notice a trend of many people who considered that the work mode was the most important thing about being free, being independent, being creative. And because I've worked in every work mode possible, just about,
Yeah, you know it all.
uh, I, I
Yeah.
know, I know that that's not really true. I've met very engaged, passionate people at different stages of my life in different kinds of businesses. And so I wanted to write a book that would be a new career manual for the new world of work. We've had some pretty significant economic changes. We've had so many changes based on the advent of the internet and people working different ways and trends towards many more people working independently and flexibly, that I wanted a career manual that people could utilize no matter what their work mode was. And really the focus that came to me with Body of Work, it's a term that we've used for a long time, especially talking about people like artists or writers or things like that. But I thought, really the premise of our life is to create a body of work that we're very proud of. And that includes everything that we create, contribute, affect, and impact throughout the course of our lives, including our work life, but also our family and community life.
I love it. I love it. And I agree, this is a new world of work. I often refer to it as the new normal. So, in your book, The New World of Work, as you call it, what does this mean? Help us define that.
Well, there are a few characteristics, and one of them I feel is instability. The
Mm,
pace of change is so rapid. We've seen it for a very long time where organizations go through frequent reorganizations, there are mergers, there's a lot more volatility within our global environment that impacts our economic markets and just the stability of different companies. But there are also all these new types of companies who are just taking advantage of particular sections of business where they can make money quickly and use create these very tiny little niche businesses. And so with a lot of this volatility, what it means for people who may have grown up in my generation, I'm 48, almost 49, and thinking about my parents' generation, we have a certain sense that if you take a particular path and you might get training and you progress in your career, that even though we've certainly seen volatility, right? I remember
yeah,
back in the 90s, starting to see many layoffs and so forth. I don't believe that it was anywhere near the pace of what we're seeing now.
agreed.
And it's the kind of environment that personally and professionally can be very disquieting if you don't develop the skills and habits that allow you to create an internal security, where you know who you are, you have a broad network of people who are aware of your work, you know the kinds of things you can do so that if, for example, you lose a key client, if you work for yourself, or if you end up losing your job, that you don't feel like the world is over, that you're
Yeah.
not counting on one particular track. So that's one really strong component I think that we all need to be aware of. I don't believe it's going away as much as I would love to be proven wrong. So I think it's more about us adapting to lots of volatility as a good adaptive strategy. The other thing that I think is more a positive attribute of the new world of work is that there are so many more ways in which people can earn a living. And I know sometimes I'll read with heartbreak news stories where somebody will say, they pursued a strong career in communications and they had a master's degree and they got laid off, from a university, and now they send out 100 resumes a day and nothing happens and they can't get any work. And I'm sitting in my weird corner of the internet where I know many thousands of people who are working freelance and have clients all over the world, where I'm saying, oh my gosh, but don't you realize with a master's degree in communications, there are so many
So
different
many
ways
things.
now that you
Yeah.
could be making a living and you could be working on a freelance basis. So there are many new opportunities that can mitigate some of the risk from the volatility.
I agree. And, we are of the exact same age, so I do appreciate how you look at history too. Recessions happen, they're cyclical, and we now need to think about always having an exit or a growth strategy in this new career normal. And thank you for describing that person who may be listening, right? Someone who was downsized from their job with a very particular educational background. You can reinvent in a new and different direction as long as you can synthesize those skills and strengths in a different way.
You really can. And it doesn't mean that it's not uncomfortable sometimes when you might lose your income or, you lose a key client, but you can, I definitely have seen there's certain qualities of people, I call them the indispensables,
Yeah,
who
yeah,
no
yeah.
matter the situation always seem to be able to bounce back, to, make something happen. And it's this very specific combination of first having, I love the metaphor that Jim Collins used in Good to Great, if you read that book many
Oh,
years
yes.
ago,
Yep.
talking about I think it was Admiral Scottsdale, who talked about the Scottsdale paradox, where he was a prisoner of war at the Hanoi Hilton in the war,
Right.
and he said he had to always look at the brutal facts of reality. That in one hand, to be aware that he really had no idea when he was getting out of that terrible situation, but also to have that optimism that he knew that somehow he would get out. And it's such a powerful metaphor because it was obviously a hugely trying time. But I believe that that kind of perspective is very, very helpful, where you're fully aware and willing to understand that at any moment your work could go away, but you have that underlying confidence and optimism that's backed by a lot of very pragmatic actions that you take on a daily basis to make sure you're aware of your skills, that you're creating and sharing your best work on a continual basis, that you're really nurturing your network. And that doesn't mean you have to have, 40,000 people in your network, but it does mean that you need to really be strategic about the kind of people to be connected to, who are aware of your work, who are huge advocates, who can help you to be getting work if times get tough.
And thank you for saying you've got to do something every day. I agree. Even if it's a baby step, you need to be seen and heard. And as you say, cultivate those relationships because you need to network before you need it, right? And have that genuine trust within your network so they know what you do well and also how you might help them if the tables are turned.
Yeah, the way I see it, I'm really putting a lot of focus in my work these days in building community and helping entrepreneurs understand how to do that and helping companies that serve entrepreneurs do that, and just also looking at individuals. And to me, one of the differences between thinking of a community versus just having a network, you can know many people, but it's very different than actually being in relationship
Yeah.
with people where there's reciprocity, where there's mutual interest. I'm sure you have your own circle of people where they get stuck, they call you, you jump on Skype, you help each
Yep.
other, through a tough personal or professional situation. There are people within your community on the business side where, over time you love them, you support what they do. They're always very supportive of you and your family. And you can look at that for social institutions, friends and connections you might have at your kids' school if you have kids, or people at, whatever your particular faith is, people that you can meet around that. And it's really in building this understanding of being in community with people and knowing that there are people who know who you are and who care about who you are. And it's another one of the characteristics, depending upon where you live and choices that you make. But for many people today that might move frequently, that might be in, in an environment in a particular community where neighbors don't know each other. There are people who live
Yes.
next door to somebody for 10 years and never really know who that person is.
Yeah.
My argument, I don't mean I'll argue with somebody, but my suggestion I would make to people is you actually, these are things you need to actively work on if
You do.
that's important to you. And I know I worked in my own neighborhood. I moved from the San Francisco Bay Area to Arizona about 12 years ago. I didn't know anybody. It was a very different environment. I was used to knowing all my neighbors and running into folks on the street. And I worked really hard over a long period of time to slowly get to know folks. And now it feels great. I know all my neighbors around me. We look out for each other. And it really does give us a sense of stability and security from that perspective.
And you have to work at it. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Great examples. So, Pam, why doesn't the traditional career advice really apply anymore?
Well, if we look at the traditional advice of just, specialize, 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 focus in one area, when you're working as an employee in a company, I think there's definitely perennial advice that's always going to work, no matter the situation. It's always great to be very proactive, to understand what's the value that you're actually delivering within your role, right? To actively search out new assignments, to be thinking about, never taking for granted the fact that people know what work you're doing. So there's some career advice that I think has really stood the test of time, and that's wonderful. The danger can be where you might get advice that, you just need to knuckle down, you just need to do a better job, focus on delivering value only in your current job so that you can be protected in the case of a layoff. Probably because I was a management consultant for 10 years, and I've seen organizations grow and then shrink, and I've been involved in layoffs, that I know often it doesn't have anything to do with performance. It can be, a strategic decision the organization makes to be getting rid of a total division, including a lot of really top performers.
Right. It
So
happens
what you
every day.
Yeah, so I think modern career advice needs to always include that piece of actively building your network, not just inside the company, but also outside the company, getting to know your peers, getting to know other folks that are within your industry, because that really is the way in which most of the hires are made. Certainly, sometimes people go through a traditional hiring cycle of submitting their resume and going through the traditional steps, but you have a much, much better chance at being seen and being open to opportunities if you already have relationships established.
So, Pam, let's talk a little bit about leadership skills in today's constantly changing environment. In your body of work, tell me how that has changed and what has stayed the same as far as what leadership skills are essential.
Yeah, there's so many really fascinating trends that I am so interested to look at, especially as I was researching the book and thinking of, in particular, leadership for folks that are in organizations, to start with that. So here's the massive paradox.
Okay.
As a leader of an organization, you are responsible for recruiting great people, making sure they feel welcome, getting them up and running as quickly as possible in their job, being productive, delivering value for the company. And when you have somebody who is a great performer, you want them to stay. You want them to get excited about the
Right.
culture, about the company, right? You want them to stay. Here's the paradox. You cannot guarantee that they will have a job. You cannot guarantee that a huge shift will happen in your organization. So think about leading somebody from the pure perspective of always encouraging them to stay. Really, sometimes protocol or company policy will be prohibiting them from having any kind of what I fondly call a side hustle. You want
Yeah.
them totally focused on their job. You want them there all the time, because that is sometimes the way that leaders really look at the way to keep employees, is to have them totally focused and engaged in what they're doing. I wouldn't argue with that. You want people totally engaged and doing the work that you're paying them for. That's totally clear. However, a bigger, I would almost argue, moral question is, if you're really leading people to just be loyal to a company and not encouraging them to be connected with the outside world, then, God forbid something happens where you
Right.
have to let that person go. How are you going to feel when you're sitting across the table from them?
Right. And you have to make that terrible announcement that their job has been downsized. Yeah.
That's right. So I've had the blessing of having really, really amazing managers when I was an employee, some of the very best leaders I can imagine. And this was back in the 90s. Um, and it's amazing. Like I've seen that kind of leadership model. That's actually a timeless thing. It's not just related to the world of work today. But I remember some of the best leadership in action that I saw from leaders that were managing me were where they were not afraid of talking about what were my future plans. They wouldn't grimace. They wouldn't all of a sudden keep me from doing the very best projects internally if I let them know that in a few years I had vision to go somewhere else. They were actively working with me to honestly have a conversation about what it is that I wanted to contribute. They held me very accountable for the work that I was doing. They really called me on my performance so that if I wasn't really performing according to what I could do, then they would let me know immediately. And I think that kind of leadership is always going to be more helpful because it's a good practice in any kind of
Yeah.
relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you pretend that your teenagers may not be getting into a bad situation, it's probably not going to prevent them from making those
From doing
choices,
it.
right?
Exactly.
Rather to
Exactly.
have those really open conversations, to be very clear about the requirements of a position. If somebody is doing a side business, off business hours and something not related and competitive to the company, if you notice that it might be affecting performance, it's perfectly okay to talk about that. But I've seen so many cases, and probably because I did run a site for 10 years called Escape from Cubicle Nation, I've heard many, many people who said, it wasn't so much that my job was unbearable. I actually really liked it, but I felt like I was so tightly controlled that I couldn't do anything else. If I had had maybe a little bit more flexibility, I probably would have stayed. And to me, that's too bad because I think a lot of the best talent today, because there are so many more options of ways to work, are going to be leaving organizations that they might stay in if there were just a more open and adult-like relationship.
Do you think that's going to change? Because clearly there are some inspired and empowered and visionary leaders, and you talked about some of them being decades ago in your personal experience, which is great. So this is a timeless philosophy. But on the whole, do you think entities, corporations, companies are ready to adopt this hybrid leadership philosophy of flexibility and focus?
The market will tell.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about it. And it's not to be, I don't know, sound foreboding or something, but as we've gone through our recent economic downturn, whenever you go through a downturn where jobs are scarce and there aren't so many opportunities, then it's really the employer's market, right? And
Yes,
and people
yes.
can
It's a
name the
talent war.
terms. Yes. So to me, what always stands the test of time is what happens when we're not in a downturn and
Right.
people do have options and they feel more secure, where you're creating an environment where people are able to do their best work, where they actually prefer the work mode of having a stable paycheck. They like to be working with other people, to be working in a team. Then you're going to be using strategies that will help you keep your best talent. And to me, that's really what it comes down to. If it doesn't have any impact at all on the bottom line or on talent, then maybe it's not advice that's actually true.
Yeah.
So, I'm biased by meeting many thousands of people over the last 10 years who have decided to leave because they really don't need to stay anymore. And a lot of these people would be amazing employees. I draw a very clear distinction between people who actually are really cut out to work for themselves, who just don't want to work for organizations, versus people who say, I simply cannot have the quality of life that I want in organizations.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm going to choose to work for myself. And I think that's a
It's
difference.
a very big difference. I agree. I agree. So, Pam, you do this incredible thing in that you help people weave together their stories, talking about what they do well, what their strengths are. So, how does one best connect different elements of their career and create a story?
Well, what you want to think about in terms of a story is it really depends on who the audience is. So you can imagine if you've had a long life and career, like it sounds like you and I both have the same amount of time,
Yes,
that
yes. Neck and
we
neck.
we
Yeah.
we might, we might both be applying for a job, and in that job there might be three primary areas of responsibility. Now, we may have 15 different strengths that we've gained throughout our 48 years, and that doesn't mean that we need to include all of those in the story that we're going to tell for that particular job interview. So one of the things you always want to keep in mind when you're writing the story for your career, you can have a tight summary, which is typically on your about page on your website or maybe your LinkedIn profile, that's highlighting the kinds of things that is positioning you for the work that you want to be doing as your next step, right? The work you're currently doing, the work that you're moving towards. So it's all about being selective of telling a coherent story based on where you want to go. And a lot of people, I think, focus on needing to cram in the 15 different things that they have done, which just makes it confusing to the audience that they're talking to.
Got it. Got it. So let's talk more about storytelling because I think this is just a fascinating topic. Some of our listeners may have had gaps in their resume or a hiatus. Maybe they took time off to raise kids or take care of an elderly parent. How do you tell that story convincingly and overcome the red flag of the gap?
Well, two things. One of them is if you do have that history, you may want to consider not applying somewhere where that would just be something that would immediately get your resume thrown out. Because there are certain typical industries or certain practices and cultures in business where any kind of a gap would be a red flag that would, that is really not worth overcoming. And that's
Yeah.
about being strategic about what you're going for. The second piece to me is it's really the bigger part of the story where you're communicating what it is that you're excited about, creating. If there is a gap, it's about being straightforward and describing, maybe why or how that you had a gap in your resume. Everything is really wrapped around how you can create a story and paint a picture of why you're really the perfect person for addressing the business need that the person who's looking to hire you or hire you to come speak to their organization or something else like that is going to have. And so without getting into the truthiness, right, that term that Stephen Colbert uses,
Right. Yes.
you never want to lie about something, you never, it's the balance is to me about being really positive, optimistic. If there's something, for example, that you need to be prepared to answer in a job interview, where maybe you went through a period of 12 to 18 months where the job market was really tough, you were retooling your skills and you were out of work, you need to be prepared to answer in a kind of crisp and straightforward manner what the conditions were, always doing it in a term that's showing that you were really focused on the longer term picture, right? You might say something like, I was laid off from my job when we had the economic downturn. I took a critical look at where it is that I wanted to be moving forward within, the next 5 years. And I decided it was really a great time to be learning how to code so that I could, gain a new skill set. And that's why I took that time off, or I had worked for 20 years and I always had the vision of traveling around the world with my family. And that was a really important thing for us to do. And so that's why we did it. So it's being clear and positive about it, having a direct answer, but not being apologetic. Because again, in today's world of work, it's more the norm now that people will not have a linear path in their career.
Absolutely. Boy, we zigzag, and that's okay. So, Pam, one final question for you. So many people say, gosh, I don't know what my passion is career wise. And I think we get hung up on that. But I like how you reframe it. And I want to ask you, is it important to find your life's purpose before choosing a career or a new business, for example, for the entrepreneurs with whom you work?
The short answer is no, it is not. I have found as a career coach, more people that bang their heads against the wall, trying to find their singular life purpose. For
Yep.
some people, the lucky few, they know it, it's very clear and intuitive to them, and that's wonderful. The metaphor I use, and I use in Body of Work, is about your roots, plural. So you can have many different things that you're passionate about, that you feel deep emotional connection with, problems in the world that you want to solve. And at different points in your career, you can choose to really build your work platform on that particular route. So that's one of the reasons I like the metaphor of body of work. You can create many different things throughout the course of your life in order to be solving the kinds of problems that you're passionate to solve. But it doesn't mean, especially for people who might be wired to be multi-passionate, right? Somebody with
Yeah,
multiple
absolutely.
interests, it doesn't mean that you have to have one singular purpose. You have to care enough about that next thing that you're doing to have the sustained energy in order to reach your particular goal. And that's really important. But it doesn't mean that there's one singular purpose.
Brilliant. You've just relieved hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people listening to say it's not just one thing, right? And I love roots, plural. Thank you. So, Pam, how do we buy Body of Work?
You can find it anywhere books are sold. So, any of the online retailers, it's also in bookstores. You can also find it at my website, which is pamelaslim.com. And that's also the place where you can find all of my social media connection spots as well.
Excellent. Pam, what a joy to have you on. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and expertise. I wish you great success. Now, you've got a massive tour coming up. Tell us a little bit about that.
I do. I'm going to hit 21 cities across the US and Canada, at least in 2015. So I hope to be visiting a city near some of our readers and listeners. You can find out all about that at pamelaslim.com. And I'm going to be focused on teaching people how to build communities, which is probably my greatest passion.
Fantastic. Well, Pam, thank you so much. I hope our professional paths cross again in person soon, and I wish you great success.
Thanks so much.
And I want to thank you for listening to Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. True career and life satisfaction is really possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.